Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and as you can see, I've set the stage for a little project of getting our red wiggler worms out of my oldest system here, a 335-day-old system which has been undergoing horizontal migration for 36 days now, and do a haul out, get the worms out, and try to make a judgment call on whether or not the remaining castings still have worms in them, requiring us to maybe bait them out or something along those lines. And then obviously getting the worms situated in their new home. That was part of my homework last time we checked in on these guys. So the newest system that has no label on it yet over there is on the shelf, occupying the space that it's gonna once we put the worms in there. But first comes the haul out. And I actually came in here just to get a reality check on the depopulation of the castings. I did that last night, and I verified that there's pretty much no worms in the finished castings. And after we do the haul out, we'll have a little bit more space to really verify that that was indeed the case or not. And it did seem to me like we're going to need a good bit of space to hold the contents of our horizontal migration feeding zone. So I got my little green tray here on the ready. So, just to recap, I think we mentioned most of this here already, right? 335-day-old system, last checked in on 13 days ago to give the horizontal migration feeding zone its third replenishment of food. And I guess it's probably safe to assume that at this point the majority of the worms have gathered. So, let's do the haul out and worm bin launch and try to figure out if there's going to be any need for baiting of stragglers. So let's get to work. After more than a month, this horizontal migration feeding zone would probably have a fair number of worm castings starting to accumulate over here. And you might have even noticed how I sort of differentiated between the number of feedings that the system got during normal composting, which to me accounts for the material that's over on that side, versus the last three feedings, which were used to set up and then to sustain an ample supply of food over in the horizontal migration feeding zone. In my mind, there is a batch of castings here that's about to be harvested, which can be tracked to some X number of feedings, and whether that's a significant piece of information that might be useful later, I just started kind of conditioning myself to think of it that way, you know, for whatever reason. So that's just one of the things I do. So there's nothing much to this other than just picking all this stuff up and moving it over. So I'm going to do exactly that, and I'm going to remind all the viewers now, because I do count on you guys to provide me with your estimates, and when we get to the release of the worms into their new home, that might actually be the point in time when we get the best possible view of all these worms. But now is also a very good opportunity to see what we got here as far as worm population. And yes, I'm trying to keep my clean hand clean, so don't hate me for that. In other worm channels, you could just see people grab everything that's in front of them with both hands, and me, I've got electronics here, and I'm trying to keep at least a couple of my fingers clean enough that I can handle my stuff without making me feel like it's contaminated with all kinds of filth and everything and needing to get rinsed off and cleaned. So right now it does feel to me like my pinky's been in contact with stuff, but I thought my middle or my ring finger was exempt, but it does seem like it's got a little bit of stuff on it. That was interesting right there, as I just sort of started picking away at a couple larger chunks of what appeared to just be paper stuck together, and what it really was a whole load of worms hiding out there. So every now and then you kind of get caught off guard, taken by surprise at just how many worms there are. Oftentimes they're just sort of obscured from view. So like I said, I'm just kind of fiddling around over here as I empty each handful to sort of turn it over and shake bigger chunks of it loose, just so we can get a sense of how many worms we're dealing with here. And it's almost like this little green tub is going to be approaching its capacity pretty soon. A lot of times I use smaller plastic containers to do this sort of haul out and transport of the worms, but on this go around we definitely gave them a really spacious horizontal migration feeding zone, and it felt to me like if we had to, we could just really keep just going, you know. The horizontal migration feeding zone would be able to sustain a lot of worms for a good amount of time, so I was sure to make sure, you know, that there's just a lot of bedding in here and moisture and that it's comfortable. And well, I did my best. Hopefully I was successful in setting it up that way for the worms. Now keep in mind, everything that you're seeing here as far as worm castings go, all created in the last 36 days in this horizontal migration feeding zone. And there's a good bit of it, that's for sure. So once again, I just felt like I had a couple larger chunks of material there in front of me that I wanted to open up, and like before, when I did, a whole bunch of worms come flying out. So, alright, I think we're getting pretty close here. Perhaps another handful or two should get us the last of the little wormies occupying this system. And since we are approaching the finish line, I'm already in my mind starting to get a little sense of what kind of worm bin estimate I'm going to provide to the calculations, because the estimated worm counts in my systems are always a collaborative effort between me and the viewers who comment. I take everybody's worm bin population estimate and then I include it with mine, and they all get averaged together, equally weighted, so my estimate doesn't carry any extra significance. It's just another one of the worm bin population estimates that I average into what ends up becoming our estimated worm bin population for the system. So once we get around to releasing these little guys, I'm assuming we'll get another chance to check them out. Even though they do occupy a fairly large quantity of their castings and leftover bedding materials, I will attempt to dislodge the material from itself a little bit to give us a better view of how many worms we're dealing with. But as far as the finished system over here, at this point I'm really just kind of looking around to see if we forgot anyone, but I do believe we've got them all. Yeah, I think we're good. Sometimes when you wait a moment or two, the worms do get moving, kind of revealing their position. But in this case, I believe we did manage to haul out all the worms that occupied the horizontal migration feeding zone, except for these two guys, because I almost missed them. So, let's just take another look around. I think we're good. I think we've got what could very well be depopulated castings here, but it's at this point, now that I got all this space to work, I think we're just going to do a little reality check on this, because my gut feeling last night when I went through this stuff to the best of my ability in the cramped space that I have here, as you can see, I'm so high that I'm actually above the rim of the container over here. It might not show on the camera, but I am pretty much at capacity over on this edge. So this is where we actually get a chance to go hunting through this material just a little bit, because all I'm looking for is a gut feeling as to whether or not there's stragglers and whether or not we're going to need to deploy a some sort of a baiting mechanism to try to round up anyone that was left behind. But like I said, last night when I came through here and went through this stuff, even then it already looked to me like no signs of any worms in here. I mean, during the last check-in, we bumped in on some of the stuff that they had received in the prior feeding, and it had remained untouched because what I had given them was banana in the peel without the peel being opened up. So what happened during the last check-in was that I simply opened up the unopened banana peels and spread the yummy food out for them. And I kind of wonder if just perhaps the essence of delicious banana over on the opposite end of the bin was something that the worms that were still stragglers in the material, could they have possibly sensed that and came over for that? Or could it be that this material has finally gotten dry enough that it was becoming repulsive to the worms that were still occupying it, causing them to go roaming around looking for a better deal somewhere? That's always possible too, but I mean, you can't feel it. Only I could feel it through the glove here, but it does not feel to me like this material is very dry. In fact, some of the way it's clumping up still makes me feel like it would be time well spent just to let this stuff maybe sit out here, spread out into the container and left to air out a little bit so that it can possibly kick off what to me seems like a little bit excess moisture. And then, only then, kind of consider it as a harvested batch of castings, because there's a lot of moisture here, and a lot of times, you know, worms find their way into the most moist spots they can find, and oftentimes it is a little clump like this. So it's not surprising when you crack open a clump of what might be just castings adhering to each other, or it might be that plus some worms that are inside of it enjoying the moisture. So, I mean, we definitely worked through the material that was closest to the horizontal migration feeding zone, looked pretty thoroughly for anything that resembles stragglers. As you can see, I've been picking out food scraps and things like that along the way. Anything that's clearly not vermicompost. And I'm definitely curious to see if I missed anything. A lot of times, this is where I would just sort of ask the viewers to let me know. You know, did I breeze right by a worm? And guess what? It looks like I did. One worm, and that was sort of in the back of my mind. What's the threshold? How many worms do I need to bump into over in this material in order for me to feel like the setting up of a bait box would be required? It does seem to me like if I come back in here at some point in the near future and I find that the dryness is good, the material crumbles better, maybe I'll just do another comb through it to see if I catch another worm or two, which I probably will. Chances are there's still a few worms in this stuff, but I'm not setting up a bait box. We're going to treat this as a done deal. So I think we all know what's next. I'm going to introduce these little guys to their new home. Oftentimes I do make reference to this concept of a terrarium effect, which, if you're not aware of what that is, like sometimes you have these enclosed systems where you've got plants growing, and the question is, well, who waters them? The fact is that the moisture content within the system on warm days allows the moisture to evaporate and condense on the container, and then in colder temperatures, that condensed moisture or that evaporated moisture that's condensed will sort of start to drip down or become so much that it collects to the point where it creates droplets and it drops back down. So here on this plastic you can clearly see the terrarium effect going on with all this moisture collected on this piece of plastic, creating exactly the effect that I've wanted. Look at all these drops all over the wall of the container too. That's all just based on condensing moisture that would otherwise have evaporated out of the system up into the air. So I don't set up my bins that way. Usually the plastic coverings I put on are just resting on the surface. But what I had set up right there sort of simulated a container with a lid. And this piece of paper has been in here for enough time, it seems, that it's starting to develop little spots of mold. I can see little spots here and there, which I guess in most circles would be considered as a bad thing. But in the worm world, it's not a problem because the worms love the mold. They'll eat that stuff right up. So maybe that piece of paper isn't going to last much once the worms realize that there's some yummy mold growing on it. And, well, the system just consists of my prepared bedding. This is shredded paper cardboard mix. And when I built the thing, I layered it in with leaves. So I would put in a bunch of the shredded material, and then I would sprinkle in leaves, layer upon layer, adding moisture, spraying it all as time goes on. And then I believe the terrarium effect over the past 13 days allows for the contents of the system to just really get nice and damp. So, you know, this is really a really good opportunity to just leave a lot of this material on my glove here with the wormies rather than taking it to the sink. Because after this, I don't think I'm going to have to be in contact with much more stuff that's going to soil my gloves. Because all we really have to do now is grab the green tub and empty its contents. But you know what? Glad I reminded myself. There was one thing I figured I would do for these little guys was, besides all this lovely bedding, leave them with a little care package. A little yummy meal so that we could treat this day as not only the inaugural launch day of the system, but also the day of their first feeding. Banana peel, a few figs, and why don't we also just include a little bit of my grit for good measure. I've got a feeling that that's a feeding that's not going to last. So, without further ado, let us proceed to the launch of this bin, which really just means the release of the wormies. All right, enough of this buildup. Let's make it happen. Here's some additional cardboard material that they can chew on, and in goes the worms. Wow. Not sure. How do I do this without making a mess? I always worry at this point, so I feel like I've got to move swiftly. 1, 2, 3. Whoa. That scared me. I thought I was going to send this stuff flying. All right, here's 1, 2, 3. A couple little wormies. And it's at this point I'm just going to do what I usually do, which is to just jostle the material around enough so that we can get a sense of how many worms we've got here. And now I'll just sort of repeat my request to you guys once again, which is to please leave me a comment and please let me know, how many worms do you think we just released into the system? I'm already formulating a number in my head, and I'm really curious to see what you think. So please comment. Did seem to me like we were pretty thorough, and I think we were, but I did miss one worm in the green tub, who will now be reunited with the rest of the gang. So whatever your number was, you can just add 1 to it now. I can only imagine what the comments are going to look like now. All my numbers are going to have 1s at the end. But that's pretty much it, you know. I mean, at this point, there's not a whole lot to do other than get them covered up. And, oh, well, I think a lot of you are probably already suspecting where I'm going with this. There is one last thing, a little bit of a tradition here in my worm bins. So, let's proceed with christening the system. So please join me in welcoming the newest of my systems, the red wigglers, sitting right out here on the end in their rightful spot where the newest of my bins belong. So that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to leave me a comment. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone's guesstimates as far as how many worms live in this thing. And then I guess we'll be back here in a little while to see how they're doing, with that banana and with the figs, and hopefully they're happy in their new home. So that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.